Hi everyone, I'm Monica Sanchez with MRC-TV. Today we are joined by editorial cartoonist and history professor from the University of Evansville, Dr. James MacLeod, to talk about his powerful illustrated response to the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris, France. Dr. MacLeod, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm interested to know, what drove you to this profession?
Well, of my two professions, I always wanted to study history, and I'm delighted that I've managed to make a life teaching history and forcing young people to read books and talk about them. But my other profession was just a lifelong love of doodling, and I kept at that and kept badgering enough editors, and eventually I was able to start selling them and make some money. So that's kind of how I ended up with these two professions.
Very interesting. I would imagine that you strongly identified with what happened in Paris, a week ago. Where were you when you first heard about the incident?
Well, I had, I'm sure like a lot of people in the American Midwest, it was morning with us, and I had just dropped my kids off at school. I sat down in my office and switched on the Guardian website out of London, and saw their headline story, and to be honest, the second I saw the words Charlie Hebdo, even though I hadn't heard anything else, I knew that this was an attack that had been motivated by cartoons. So I clicked through and read the story with, I suppose, horror and sadness and just deep regret that this had happened to at least four of my fellow cartoonists.
So you knew them personally?
Oh no, I didn't. I knew their work, and I knew the newspaper had done the last. Having published the Danish Mohammed cartoons and the attacks on the newspaper since that. But no, I identified with them as members of the cartoonist profession, although I didn't know them.
Right, absolutely. I first saw your cartoon on Twitter, among others, and it really stood out to me as simple yet profound. What prompted you to draw that specific image?
Well, thank you. I knew within, let's say, 15-20 minutes as I was reading, I wanted to get some of the details of the story, and like everyone else was transfixed by that image of the Paris policeman on the street being executed by these guys, and I didn't know what I was going to draw, but I knew that the message that I wanted to convey was that ultimately the power of expression, the power of creativity, and the power of ideas is stronger than the power of physical force and brutality. So I just sat down with my tablet and started drawing, and I thought it was pretty simple to contrast a gunman standing in a pool of blood with something creative, and then it seemed logical to have it be a cartoonist. So I did that, and you obviously want to minimize the amount of words if you can, and so I just left it at powerful, more powerful.
Many have described the cartoons like yours weapons against an attack on the freedom of speech. What difference do these cartoons make, in your opinion?
That's a pretty profound question. I think they're symbols, right? I think the attack was a symbolic attack, or at least could be interpreted as a symbolic attack on the principle of free expression, something that is so fundamental to the free world. And ideas, a symbolic attack on the ideas of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment, as you know, is a movement which had one of its most important centers in Paris. It also had one of its most important centers in Edinburgh, so I feel this stuff pretty strongly. And maybe few countries in the world have been so influenced by the principles of the Enlightenment as the United States of America, where I am a citizen. So for these reasons, I can certainly see why people reacted so strongly to the attack, and I think they saw the cartoons as response, almost as the people who can draw, using their talent to express the feelings of many people around the world that this was an attack that could not be allowed to stand, that we had to respond in one way or another.
As a history professor, I understand you've given plenty of speeches on the historical significance of editorial cartoons. Has a high-profile event like this happened in the past, where cartoons or cartoonists were met with such violence and anger?
If you go back through history, cartoonists have been arrested, cartoonists have been censored, cartoonists have been persecuted. And, I think it's important to say that cartoonists are persecuted to this day in many parts of the world where there isn't such a high level of freedom of press as we enjoy in much of the West.
The Charlie Hebdo cartoons were obviously disrespectful, and they were meant to be. Just using the image of Muhammad is considered blasphemy to followers of Islam. In your opinion, are there any lines that cartoonists should not cross?
Wow. The very short answer is yes. I'm not entirely sure where these lines are, and I don't think they're static lines. I think it's been said, I think, a lot this week, but when we defend Charlie Hebdo, I think it's a very interesting case in the debate about free speech, because we don't get to defend the speech that we like necessarily. We're here defending a magazine, much of which we might well disagree with ourselves. And yet that is what free speech is. We don't get to just protect the speech that we like. We need to protect the speech of everyone. And, I would argue strongly to defend the speech of people who have very different views from myself. Now, with Charlie Hebdo, I think you could also make a pretty strong case that while they say their target is radical Islam, some of their cartoons seem almost just like they're designed to insult Muslims. And I have problems with that, and I particularly have problems with it in France, where the Muslim population is by and large a marginalized and relatively powerless community anyway. And so there's a kind of, for me, an uncomfortable sense that sometimes the cartoonists at Charlie Hebdo were kind of piling on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it makes it, I think, a rather uncomfortable case to defend free speech, but an absolutely fascinating one.
That's a really interesting point. How do you think this act of terror will impact the future of editorial cartoons? Do you think people will be more hesitant to draw, what they want to draw, or do you think the opposite will happen?
Again, the honest answer is I don't know. I think it's a really important question that you're asking. Is it likely to put a little bit of a hesitation in cartoonists' minds? Yes, I think it is. I found myself this week kind of in the spotlight a little bit and asking myself, do I really want to be out here talking about these issues? I've got family and I am concerned about that. But in the end, I think every journalist like yourself, every artist, every creative person has to make that decision for themselves. Am I going to keep talking, or am I going to allow the men with guns to stop me? I think if you're question about the journalists of Charlie Hebdo, the answer came across loud and clear today with the publication of their latest edition, which of course, as you know, had another cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad on the cover.
Right. As an editorial cartoonist yourself, are you afraid of retribution?
Well, I've said a few times this week that I have been called every name under the sun, but nobody has ever threatened me. I also joke that I've drawn cartoons in our local newspaper here that are critical of, for example, the police department or the sheriff's department, and I don't think I get a disproportionate amount of traffic tickets. But I think that the reality is that, especially in today's social media world, where something that is said in Evansville, Indiana, can be around the world in seconds and duplicated numerous times, in a sense, the Je suis Charlie hashtag is a reality. In some senses, you and me and all of us are in the front lane here, and I don't want to inflate us who put our political views out into the public sphere have to live with the consequences. And, on a lighter note, I would say that, I was raised in Scotland, and my mom pretty much raised me with the principle that if you're willing to dish it out, you've got to be willing to take it. So I think political cartoonists, the very first place that you get calluses is on your fingers, but pretty quickly after that you develop calluses everywhere else because you need pretty thick skin.
Right. So looking forward, what advice might you give aspiring cartoonists or journalists who might feel jolted by this tragedy?
The first thing I would say is you have to do what's right for you, for you and your family. And I certainly would not, I would hope no one would judge me for doing or not doing something, and I certainly wouldn't judge you. But beyond that, I think with all cartoonists, I would say just be yourself. In the end, especially if you're publishing cartoons every day, you can't pretend to be something that you're not. You have to stay pretty true to who you are and your political values. And if you're a conservative, go ahead and draw conservative cartoons. If you're a liberal, go ahead and draw liberal cartoons. Don't try to pretend to be something else.
Right. That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for your insight. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Is there anything else that you might like to add?
The only thing, and pleasure talking to you too. The only thing I would also add is that I feel like, and I'm not sure how comfortable your network would be with this, but I think you also have to. I feel like I have to make a comment that these attacks are also, there's a reason why these guys were motivated to do what they did. And I think if all we do in the West is rally around the flag of free expression, nothing is going to change. I think we also have to take a long, hard look at ourselves, in all the countries of the West, as to what has been the impact of our actions and our policies over the last decades, and what can we do better to ensure that young men and women in our countries don't end up taking up arms against us, but end up in fact defending the values that we consider to be important. And I'd really like to see that debate being carried out both in the conservative side of the media and on the media as well.
To that point, I'm wondering, do you agree with certain news outlets that kind of shifted the blame towards the cartoonists for provoking the Islamic sympathizers, or?
No. I mean, I think, were these cartoons very provocative, and is it legitimate to be really mad at the people who produced them? Absolutely. And, I'm sure I've drawn cartoons that would make you mad, and I'm sure you've produced spots that would make me mad. But I would like to think that we would have a conversation like this, right? And we would muster evidence, and we'd have an argument and a discussion, and hopefully both depart wiser. The taking up of arms against guys who are only holding pens is absolutely unacceptable. So is it okay to be upset by the free speech of other people? Of course, but the way you counteract my free speech is by using your own free speech. And what happened on Wednesday in Paris is I think, wholly unacceptable.
Agreed. Well, great. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts with us. We really look forward to see what you draw next.
Great. Thank you so much.